EJ, one of your co-hosts, and Lorian Tier joining today so we can talk about episode 54, The Masks of Medical Self-Care. Just a friendly reminder that anything discussed in this podcast is not to be used as a diagnosis or replacement for conversations with your own doctors, therapists, psychologists, or other medical professionals. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about medical self-care, how some challenges to keep that prevents us from having it, as well as, kind of some of those, how we've overcome it. And then we're also going to join it with our next episode that's going to talk a little bit about resources and where you can find some of the things that we talk about today. So yeah, let's kind of get started and jump right in.
Hi, everybody. So I feel like one of the most important things we need to mention is that we are currently all in like Siberia weather. It's freezing. T, I think you said you finally reached 0. We're at like 1 degrees.
Yes,
Everybody, please, gosh, it's just stay warm. Winter has finally hit in at least for us, and it's cold. I feel cold. I feel chilled, but God is good. Roof over the head, heaters on. I know they said that there's this possibility, with wind and other things that we could lose some power. I'm praying that doesn't happen. But we're trying to, keep all of our technology charged up, and because who wants to be without technology? Anyway,
at least you can be cold and still be on your phone.
I just figured, we needed to identify the fact that we're in freezing temperatures, but we're moving forward. So I think we all felt at the beginning of the year that it was important to really kind of talk about the challenges that we all face within the systems that are around us. I, being the positive person that I am, always trying to have that positive spin, if you will. What do I say all the time? We're not living in a third world country. We're not dying from dysentery, and World War III is not going on. So, all things considered, we're doing well. We in America, especially, we do have exceptional care. Most of us do. There are people that don't. But even in America, compared with a third world country, compared with a war-torn country, we're not running away from bombs all the time, and we do have systems in place. But as I'm currently going through right now, the system's kind of getting in the way. And it is not one of the things EJ and I were talking about last night is this one particular system of disability that I'm currently on. It's not set up to get off of it. They're not used to people getting off of it.
Right.
So it's not easy. It's very complicated. And it's complex. And sometimes it's very frustrating. There's been many a day where I've wanted to chuck the phone or just cry out in frustration, or I'll call T and I'll be like, this just stinks, because it's currently handicapping me even more and making life frustrating. Right. So I think we want to identify the fact that we all understand, and it is frustrating sometimes. We have to spend hours on hold and jumping through hoops and just not knowing the right question to ask, maybe there's so many different things that we go through with these systems that are in place to help us that are very discouraging sometimes and very
Oh, yeah.
frustrating. And so we want to kind of identify that and talk about that. And let's try to diagnose and figure out how we might be able to overcome some of that.
Yeah, I walked through a lot of it. I've, as an observer, as also, as myself, I've done, observed you, and I've also observed friends and even my parents going through a lot of it. And it's the medical system, for lack of a better term, sucks. And, then the barriers of, um, depending on the job you have will depend on the type of medical you can get. And you pay, if you have it through your work, does that cover all your family or does that just cover you? And then if it only covers you, how do you get your family care? And then how much extra money a month do you have to put out to get extra medical to cover the stuff that the other stuff doesn't cover? I know, as like a single person, um, I have one income. I don't have enough money to pay an extra couple $100 a month for additional medical to cover what my other medical doesn't. I've been blessed with some opportunities that have worked, that help with some of that, in the last few years at least. But it's not easy. And I remember a time when I was unemployed and I was paying $300 a month for medical just so I had something to get my prescriptions, which is sad. Um,
One T, I know you're going to address this a little bit, but there's these formularies that in all of these health insurances. So depending upon what insurance you have or what type of care program that you have, we watch TV, right? We and there's ads and they're like, oh, there's this drug, blah 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 blah, and it happens to be something that you're going through. You go to your doctor and they're like, yeah, that's not covered under your insurance, um, or, well, you might be able to get that, but you have to jump through A, B, and C hoop first before we can even get to that one, because that's the formulary that your current system is under, So, yeah. And I know
So
you
yeah,
just experienced that.
right, right. And accessing, so we're talking about barriers to accessing medical self-care, because that's really what medical is. It's taking care of ourselves. And in order to give our best, we have to be at our best. And so cost is definitely a barrier. Access to care, depending on where you live. How do you get there? If you have children, how do you have childcare? There's all these things that are barriers that if you're accessing medical, hopefully you're accessing it before, as preventative, but oftentimes we don't have time to do preventative as much as we would like to do. So we're always trying to react. We're always trying to catch up to it, which means we're trying to respond and deal with it when we're not feeling well. That's why we're accessing it, right? So that's one of the things I observe a lot with folks, when they're trying to receive disability and they have to be on the phone for hours and they're sick, or they're trying to figure out their transportation, or or manage all these different appointments that they have to do to address this thing they're trying to address. It's exhausting. And then if you are working on top of it, trying to get, your work to cover it. My daughter just recently went through that, where she had to get a medical procedure done because she was calling out a lot because she was sick a lot. So she was going to get this medical procedure and her work is punishing her for it. So she's pretty much without a job now because they're like, you called out too much and you didn't do X, Y, and Z while you were sick, and we're going to punish you for addressing the issue. And so you could be better. So, I mean, it's crazy, so you have those things to contend with.
Yeah. My youngest son just went through something like that as well. He works for a major big box corporation, right?
Mhm.
and he was getting dinged because he was following the rules. And they told him that he was accessing the medical, oh,
Oh yeah, yeah,
he was accessing the wellness clinic too
yeah. They
much.
have like a sick bay to, yeah, and he was too much, really.
Yeah, he was using it too much because he was trying to be careful. He was
Right.
trying to be mindful. He wanted to be at his best and do his best. And so, and some of his job requires him to operate really heavy machinery. He's like, Mom, if I'm feeling a little dizzy, I shouldn't be doing that. I should be
Right.
I should be mindful. I should be. And he got in trouble for accessing it too much. And he's like, Mom, everything I read says this is what I'm supposed to do. But when I go do it, then I get in trouble
Right.
because I'm
Yeah,
using.
because what he read, they put on paper so that they can show the powers that be that they're addressing these issues and they have this available. And oh, look how great this is,
Right.
But he used it and he got in trouble.
because they really didn't intend him to use it. They just wanted it there, saying, "Look what we do." I'm sorry, that might be a little bit cynical, but
Yeah. Yeah.
that's you see that. So those are definite barriers, and you're trying, like I said, you're trying to access them when you're already sick, right? Um,
Remember when back, what, it's been over a year now, but when I had the COVID, and almost dying and all of that, right? But I get home and I didn't have access to what I needed, which was oxygen.
Oh
Oh,
gosh, yeah.
oh my gosh, that was so hard. And because of the kind of scary situation that I was in, lost my previous caregiver. I'm trying to get new caregivers. I really like what you said. We're often, hopefully, we're doing this preventatively, right? I say all the time that I've built up an amazing team. And thank God I have, because I wouldn't be getting through this. I have a neighbor right now who is got some new medical conditions going on, and she doesn't have access to the care that she really needs.
right.
So, and
Well,
it's
and
hard. You're in the middle of it. You're so
that's
tired.
another barrier
Done.
is your medical team itself. It's not that they individually, but they don't always talk to each other. So it's left to you, the patient, to make sure they all have the right information so that they're making better decisions.
Yes.
And, but when you're sick and you're not a doctor, so there's a couple things that happen. First of all, you're not a doctor, so you're trying to communicate from a layman's point of view and get them to take you seriously. It's like you know what you're talking about. This is your body, this is your health, and you're trying to tell them about yourself and what you're going through, but also what you've learned, what you're dealing with another healthcare provider. Because like Lori, you have a complex medical system, that you've got all these different things, and you have to either trust that they're talking to each other, which in your experience they don't, and so then, yeah, and then they look at you like, where'd you get your degree? Google
Right.
University, and it's like, well, yes, as a matter of fact, because Google offers medical journals. Thank you. I mean, I deal with
Right.
that with my husband. He's got it's a rare, cancer and other conditions to go with it, and it impacts other systems. But to get them to understand that, I have to talk to them about it. And then they do, they kind of, some appreciate it. I mean, don't get me wrong. Some doctors do appreciate the information I have available, but there's other ones they just kind of like, oh, how sweet. You looked it up on Google. And it's like, yeah, well, I started there,
Right.
Right.
you know.
Right.
So trying to communicate with your team of doctors and medical providers, in a way that kind of crosses bridges is a big responsibility when you're sick.
Right.
And then there's the money aspect, right?
Yeah.
This, we
Ooh.
live in a consumer driven, um, commercially driven society.
Right.
And
Which has its perks, but
right,
there's other things that it doesn't. Sure.
right. And like um, you ran into this with,
Yes.
you have a new condition in your life and you were not able to get the meds you needed.
Mhm.
You really
Yep.
had to do a lot of homework, a lot of pushing, a lot of asking questions. And then, of course, you know, finally found somebody willing to listen and go, oh, I'm here to help you,
Yeah. Yeah.
let me help you with that. But yeah,
And it's hard because what's interesting is, okay, so I have insurance through my work, right? So I pay for it, but that means I have co-payments and it means I have deductibles and I have all these things. What's interesting is when I was talking with my medical providers about medications and whatnot, they're like, oh, you have great insurance. I'm like, several $100s of coming out of my pocket for this thing is not great insurance. And everybody, all my friends and family are like, oh, you need to get on that medication. It's great. I've been on it. And it's like, well, how'd you pay for it? Well, that's a system too. And
it
and I don't
is.
want to dog on it. It is what it is. But it's frustrating because it's like, this is supposed to be life-saving medication for me that I can't access unless
Right.
I jump through all these hoops. And again, and then I'm working and I'm sick. I've been very, very sick over the last year and didn't know why. And
Right.
I end up with a diagnosis that's one of the most expensive ones out there besides cancer.
Right.
Diabetes. Yay.
It's
The cost
horrible.
the cost, I mean, I've heard about it, but it was never in my, in my circle. I mean, I've people I love and care for that have had it, and or have it. And, it's like, okay, that's a thing. But I never really truly comprehended what it meant to try to swim through this fog of addressing these issues when my brain is so foggy and I'm feeling so down and lack of energy and all of these things. How do I do it and do everything else I'm still trying to do, work and etc. So those are things that are real barriers for people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I, go ahead, EJ.
I've watched, I mean, I remember when I first got diagnosed with depression and I needed to go on a medication. Unfortunately, the medication was not generic. And so the first month, the medical I had covered it all except $30 copay. That's not bad.
Yeah.
The next month, the copay was $100. The month after that, it was $150. The next month after that, it was $300. Because the way that medical worked was they allot you, say, $1,000 a year for medical or for prescriptions. So then you get a prescription and they're like, well, this might be a one-time pop. So we'll just, cover the whole thing. But then the next month when they come around, they're like, there's not as much money left. And they're like, well, what if she needs antibiotics in a month? Or what if she needs this? So then they only paid part of it. And then they paid a quarter of it. And then they paid, and there wasn't as much options of going online and getting coupons like GoodRx and some of those other things where you can get discounts or directly from the manufacturer. Because it's well known that if you have a drug that is non-generic, which means it's name brand, it's usually $300 to $500 more per month to get it. And it takes up to 7 years for the licensing to change to allow it to have generic. I cannot tell you how much I celebrated when it went generic because I got to the medication for like a fraction of what I was paying. So there were times my parents had to pay for it. There were times I had to cut my dosage in half and go against what my doctor wanted just because I couldn't afford to get it. It's terrible out there, and it really prevents us from a lot of things, which is sad because they're medications we need. Thankfully,
Yep.
I'm on a medication now that's a little bit more affordable. $20 for 3 months is a lot more doable than
Yeah.
Yeah.
$300 a
Well, and
month.
that leads into another barrier. Who gets to decide these things? Because
Yes.
I know trying to access the medications my husband needed for his cancer and stuff, there were times that he would have to go without because the insurance refused to cover it. They wanted a pre-auth, or they wanted this, they wanted that. And, oh, well, we don't think you really need that. The insurance companies make those decisions a lot. Like, oh, we
Right.
don't really think you need that. You need to take this one first. And you need to suffer because you're your provider, and you already know this isn't going to work because your provider and you know your system the best, but the insurance company says they know better.
That's what I was going to bring up, because it took me forever to get on the Botox for the migraines, which is a gold standard now in helping with migraines.
Mhm.
But I can't tell you how many people in my life can't get it. And what I went through to get it, they
Mhm.
required me, these non-doctors in my life, these formulary seeking insurance companies who don't want to pay for the drug that
And it's not
your
just
doctor knows is going to be the one for you, right?
right.
Because you've already, so
And
you
then
have to suffer through it.
on the
I did
flip side of that,
3 medications.
the other thing that happens is the pharmacy companies, the pharmaceuticals, because what they do is they're like, this is the new drug. Well, whatever agreement they come to with the insurance and the primary cares makes it so that, like, I'm going to use my situation as an example. Their go-to right now for diabetes is metformin. And now there's studies and there's things happening, and I want to be very clear that I am not an expert in metformin,
Right.
but I've been an observer of people who are on metformin, whether it's clients, friends, family, whatever. The side effects are atrocious. It's not effective, and it's very, very expensive. But that's the first thing they wanted to put me on. And I went, whoa, whoa, whoa. I don't think I want that. I've seen too many bad things about it. But that's what they pushed, was metformin. And that's what I hear from everybody. And I switched primary cares, and that was a big thing that I ended up doing. But it it was, I know it happens, and that's how we came to the opioid crisis in America, is because of these deals that the background companies make. And so sometimes they'll have a quote unquote gold standard,
Mhm.
what they go to immediately, and it's not in the best interest of the patient. And if you're not willing to do that, you're listed as a bad patient, uncooperative, et cetera, not willing to do what it takes.
Oh,
And then that goes in your record. I've had clients who've
right.
had to deal with that, where they're like, I don't feel like this is the best thing for me, advocating for themselves wonderfully. And then they get kicked out of that clinic or that
Right.
doctor's office because they're not willing to cooperate. Yet in their policy and procedures paperwork that you sign when you first come in with them is that you have a right to your own medical decisions.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
funny. It's a catch-22,
Mhm. Yeah.
which which I
Interesting.
which I feel like kind of leads us into how we've overcome some of these, because I feel like we've all dealt with the
Mhm.
drama of not being able to get something, or having to ask a friend for money so you can get a medication. Or Lori, I remember, I think you were in a facility or something, and um, you couldn't afford or wasn't going to cover like a walker or something,
Oh,
and somebody
yeah.
had to buy you one. And those things aren't cheap. They're like 150 on a good day.
Mhm.
Um, and so, like, again, that is one way we've overcome. We've reached out and used our um, like our extended family, our friends, people who may have used something in the past and aren't using it now, and they just want to pass it on because they spent so much money, they just don't want to get rid of it. But if somebody can get some use out of it, um, I know for me, like I kind of had mentioned that the medication went generic, so I was able to get it for a lot cheaper price. And now I talked with my doctor, and they were able to put me on one that was a little milder than what that was. to allow me to get on something that's a little more cost effective. Thankfully, I have my so the caregiving job that I have doesn't get medical through the company we work for, it's through our union. So it doesn't matter what company we work out of, we can still get our hours go to the union, and the union dictates what we can have for medical. And so through that, I was able to get in with a company, and then they have a financial aid program where every 6 months I can apply and just say, like, I am low income, I don't have a lot of money, I don't have this, and they usually cover me 100%. So in that 6 month period that I'm approved for, I can get any of my medications, any of my copays for doctor visits, any of my copays for lab work, or any of that is all covered 100% as long as I go to that clinic. So that's been really a huge help. And I had a surgery covered because of that. This was like 15 years ago now, and I had my gallbladder out, and I was unemployed, and I was paying like $300 a month for medical because I didn't have medical through work, and I wasn't going to pay the $500 a month that the Cobra or whatever wanted me to pay. So but I needed this surgery, and I got 95% of it was covered 100% from the financial aid through the hospital. And I think I only ended up having to pay for like the $300 anesthesia bill, because that came from a different company that didn't have any financial aid. So I highly recommend checking into any financial aid options through your clinics, your companies, and other like online services. And even like Lori, I know you can talk about this more, but her glasses, her glass prescription is like the strongest one out there. And most online companies don't cover it. Like, you can't go to like iBuyDirect or Zenny.com and
I
order a
wish.
pair of glasses. We've tried, and they're like, yeah, we don't do your glasses. So she has to actually have them done at a like an eyeglass place, and they're not cheap. And she lucked out and got a new medical that actually had eye coverage, so she was able to get it. And I have that through my company, so I get one pair every 2 years. I lucked out and I was able to go to one of those online sites, and for like pennies compared to what I had paid, I got two pair of glasses. Yeah, so I just like, there are ways to get help out there. So what are some of the ways you guys have kind of dealt with it?
One of the things I want to say right off the bat, before you ever begin research, before you ever begin trying to tackle these things, one of the biggest ways that you will help yourself, if you're a faithful person, do some prayer. If even if you're not a faithful person, do some mindfulness, do some inner searching, because the absolute biggest way that you can help yourself is to be humble. You're going to have to be willing to ask for help. I think sometimes we forget we weren't created as silos, as these, we're
Right.
relational beings. We are supposed to be there with and for each other, whether that's an intimate relationship, a best friend, a family member, part of your tribe, whatever you want to call it. We're not meant to do this alone. So remembering that, and then remembering that we're all in this together. There's somebody out there who's already likely gone through what you've gone through. So then look at that. But the biggest thing you can do is, what do we call it? Eating humble pie. I remember way back in the beginning, the dawn of time. Feels like that some days. When I began this huge medical journey that I've been on, I remember in the beginning, I really did a lot of suffering in silence and just being confused and not really knowing what to do and where to do. And the more I spoke up and the more that I was willing to say, maybe I'm not supposed to be doing this alone, let me ask for some help, things began to come into place. So I just think the biggest thing you can do is to be humble and to ask. And then there's a whole bunch of other things, but that right there is a foundation that you need to build into this process.
And it's not easy to ask for help.
We're not meant that. We're told in America, pull up your bootstraps and, go out there, just do it. Everything is about, I don't know. It's not, our society does not, we
Right.
consider asking help weakness.
Yeah.
And that's
Well,
sad.
and I'm, just caveating, when all this stuff was going on for me, the bulk of it was done before I was a Christian. So it was even harder to step back and be like, I need help. But I've obviously come a long way. And it was just through a conversation I was having with, I believe, my doctor recently, or in the last few years, that pointed me to this financial aid through my medical company that I currently have. So it's talking. It's a lot of it has to do with who you know and what you talk about, and not being afraid to say, I need help.
Team.
And not be afraid to hear no,
That's true.
because that's okay. You can hear no, that
Yep.
you don't want someone helping you that can't. But the follow-up question is, well, if you can't, do you have any ideas?
You know
So,
who might.
yep, absolutely. So, and to go with all of this is to also evaluate your motivation. If it means something to you, you can expend the energy to do it, and it's an investment. That's the other thing I work with people so often. I'm, as a therapist, I'm asking them to do things they may not have the energy to do. So we have to have the discussion of investing. Like, okay, yes, you're going to have to find that somewhere just so you could get this thing off your plate and you have more room on your plate.
Right.
But it's asking a lot to do that. And a person has to have the motivation. And Lori, I'm going to kind of use you as an example. It seems like you're a little bit of the guinea pig this episode. But a couple of years ago, you wouldn't have dreamed of being where you're at now. And I'm going to say it like I said it then, when you started making different choices. You were busy dying. Then you got busy living.
Yep.
So expending the energy to do the things that you've done over the last couple of years made more sense to you because your mind frame changed. And there was nothing, and I know people aren't going to agree with this, and that's okay. There was nothing wrong per se with where you were at then, because that was where you were at. That's what you had decided for yourself. You may not have realized you had decided it for yourself, but you had gained some acceptance. You had done these things. And sometimes that's the answer too. And I know that's a hard thing for anybody listening to hear, but being a spouse of someone who has a cancer that cannot be cured, there comes this point of this acceptance. Like, okay, each crossroad we come to, there has to be a decision, and there has to be acceptance of that decision. And it has to be okay to make those decisions, and for each person. But if you've decided that this is your motivation, you want to address these things, great. Here's some resources we're going to cover. If you've come to that point where you don't really have what you need to do these things, then I would really, really suggest understanding that and knowing you've made that decision for yourself and accepting it. And you don't have to share that decision with anybody, but within yourself, because it's a hard spot to be in. And yeah, that's kind of Just some thoughts there.
I'm actually
Hey.
really glad that you brought that up. Um, I was at a very, very different place. Just, you know what? Well, by the time I had the stroke, I really was at a place in my life where I was. We've had this conversation. I was tired. I mentally, physically, emotionally, and I, in my defense, if you will, I'd gone through a lot. um, and I didn't come to that place easily,
No,
but
it's not your nature.
no, it's not. But I really did feel like, and I had a great counselor in my life at the time she amazingly recognized this person sitting in front of me needs a piece about this. She doesn't need me to fix it. She doesn't need me to guide her somewhere else. She needs to find a peace. And she helped me find that peace.
Mm-hmm.
And then in doing that, I was finally able, that I could take the next step. And I think it's important to remember that, so from a faithful perspective, we talk about ecclesiastical seasons in our life, that there is a time and purpose for everything under heaven. And you think about it, you're going to walk through valleys, you're going to be on peaks, you're going to have times, we tell new parents, this is just a season. It's going to move to this one, and then it's going to move to this one. And we need to remember that. So sometimes it's just focusing on the season that you're in, what you need just in that moment. And then when you figure that out, then the next steps become clearer. And you're like, so I got to that place of peace. And then good friends like you, T, and other really good close friends of mine were like, wow, Lori, because I finally got to a place where I was a little more vulnerable, transparent, because I wasn't running so much, and I was at a place of peace, right? But then those that were close to me were able to help me identify and go, Lori, you don't love yourself. You don't. I just realized, you've been doing this, you've been doing that. Now that makes sense. And then I was able to, with the help of loved ones and friends and professionals, identify what self-care was in my life, not somebody else's, in my life. That's another big important thing. So we're looking at overcoming these things. What is working and what will work for you, not anybody else. We are uniquely made. We are individuals. We can read a blog, we can read a medical journal, but you have to understand, and what I've come to understand within my medical team is that we're trying to find what works for my body, what works for my mental health, what works for my spiritual health, what works for my, everything, but it is individual. The other really important thing that I think we need to remember, so we need to remember to ask for help. We need to remember to be humble. We need to remember that it's individual. We also need to remember that medical is a practicing science. It changes all the time, moment to moment, day to day, month to month, year to year. Like, there's new advancements. There's things that go backwards. There's flus and pandemics and, world changing events. There's medicine is a practicing science. It's one that changes and it is not static. And so thus our care will never be static. And I think we need to remember that so that we don't panic, so that we don't get too frustrated, so that we have to remember it's a practicing, not static, constantly changing, evolving science. And those that are in that industry are constantly changing and learning and growing. And so I think if we can remember that, we can tap into more of that peace and calmness and less frustration and less. The other thing too, it's never going to happen immediately. There's systems. We do have to jump through hoops. I did have to go through 3 different medicines before insurance would pay for the really expensive one that my doctor knew was going to work for me.
And one of the other medications she had a severe reaction to that was not good.
No, it's kind of scary sometimes. But you do have to go through these hoops. We do. And, just learning to speak up, is another huge one. So.
Yeah. And I know we've kind of touched on how we've overcome, and you're probably wondering like, well, where are these resources? Well, we're going to talk a little bit more specifics in the next episode. So definitely be on the lookout for that in a couple of weeks. So I think we'll wrap this one up here. Again, just a friendly reminder that anything discussed in this podcast is not to be used as a diagnosis or replacement for conversations with your own doctors, therapists, psychologists, or other medical professionals. This episode is on YouTube and most major podcast platforms. Don't forget to subscribe so you can keep up on our new episodes and all the extra information. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Threads as Behind the Mask PC. You can also email feedback or future episode ideas to behindthemaskpc@gmail.com. To find us online, links for us will be in the description box. And on behalf of the ladies and myself, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.